On June 28, 1914, a chauffeur took a wrong turn down a side street in Sarajevo. As the car reversed to get back on the correct route, it stalled, right in front of a 19-year-old student named Gavrilo Princip. He raised a pistol and fired. His target was Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Those shots triggered a conflict that would rage for the next 4 years. By the time the guns fell silent, 20 million people were dead. The fighting spanned multiple continents, and several ancient empires fell to ruin. It makes you wonder, if you had a time machine and you could go back to that street corner and stop that one teenager from pulling the trigger, would World War I have happened at all? The reality of geopolitics is rarely that simple. If a mountain of dynamite is rigged to blow and someone tosses a lit matchstick into it, the matchstick didn't create the destructive force. The mountain of dynamite was already there, waiting. Look at this map of Europe from the turn of the century. You won't find many democracies here. Instead, the continent was dominated by massive, expansionist monarchies. The German and Austro-Hungarian empires controlled vast swaths of land in the center, flanked by the enormous Russian Empire to the east. At the helm of the German Empire was Kaiser Wilhelm II, a hot-tempered ruler constantly paranoid about an attack from his neighbors. In Russia, Tsar Nicholas II was struggling to maintain his grip on power over an increasingly restless population, while Great Britain was ruled by King George V. Here is an interesting detail. These three men at the head of the world's most powerful empires were first cousins. They belonged to the exact same extended family. The impending global conflict was, quite literally, a massive family feud. But beneath this royal drama were deep territorial tensions. In 1908, the Austro-Hungarian Empire annexed the region of Bosnia-Herzegovina. This aggressive land grab infuriated the neighboring Slavic populations, particularly in Serbia, who desperately wanted to unite the South Slavs into their own independent nation. The borders you see on the map were highly unstable. Europe was a fragile Jenga tower of massive imperial egos layered directly on top of boiling ethnic resentment. The situation was made even more volatile by 4 specific systemic pillars. The first was imperialism. Kings and emperors were locked in a race to expand their borders, largely to capture resources and exploit cheap labor to maximize their wealth. Expanding these sprawling empires required immense brute force, bringing us to the second pillar, militarism. Countries invested heavily in massive navies and modern industrialized weaponry. This chart shows the combined military spending of Europe's 6 great powers. In 1870, it was £94 million. By 1914, it quadrupled past $370 million. This aggressive buildup created a paranoid feedback loop. Unified empires were forced to outspend their neighbors simply to survive. The third pillar was nationalism. But this was a nationalism without liberation. Rulers weaponized national pride, cultivating a toxic, race-based superiority complex to convince their citizens that they were culturally superior to the people next door. Finally, the fourth pillar, alliances. Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy formed the Triple Alliance. Britain, France, and Russia formed the Triple Entente. These pacts guaranteed that local conflicts would explode globally. When Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia, these mutual defense treaties instantly dragged everyone into the fight. Europe did not stumble into a global war by accident. The continent had been meticulously wired with 4 explosive charges: imperialism, militarism, nationalism, and rigid alliances, installed by its own leaders. The millions of common people who actually fought this war had almost no reason to do so. They were pushed into the ranks primarily out of financial desperation. For many, a lack of local employment left enlisting in the army as the only viable way to feed their families. To convince these men to risk their lives for the expansion of an empire, governments relied heavily on the media. Newspapers and newly appointed official poets rebranded imperial conquest as a glorious, selfless service for the country. Governments across the continent employed these exact same tactics to manufacture consent. They depicted soldiers as disciplined, invulnerable heroes, engineering support for the war among the very people who would suffer its consequences. But the reality on the ground looked entirely different. The romanticized glory evaporated instantly in the mud of the trenches, replaced by horrors of poisonous fumes and shattered limbs and industrial-scale mechanized slaughter. Intellectuals and soldiers who experienced the front lines tried to warn the public. Writers like Wilfred Owen pushed back against the state narrative, publishing poems that exposed the incredibly inhumane conditions and the lies fed to them by the ruling class. The propaganda machine had successfully convinced millions of poor, unemployed men to cross borders and shoot at each other, solely to protect and expand the wealth of the monarchs sitting safely in their palaces. Eventually, many of these men saw through the fabrication. Entire battalions began dropping their weapons. We saw widespread cases of mutiny and soldiers flatly refusing to continue fighting on multiple fronts. The clearest example of this shared humanity happened during the Christmas truce of 1914. British and German soldiers defied their commanders, stepping out of their trenches and crossing no man's land to celebrate together, exchanging food and singing songs. Their commanding officers quickly put a stop to it. They aggressively suppressed these moments of empathy, threatening to execute their own men by firing squad if they refused to return to the killing. The war functioned as the logical conclusion of imperial expansion, a collision that had been decades in the making. The bullet in Sarajevo provided the timing, but the systemic drive for expansion provided the momentum. When we look at global conflicts today, it's easy to get distracted by the daily news of inciting incidents and immediate triggers. But by understanding the true origins of the Great War, we learn to look past the matchsticks falling today and start paying attention to the mountain of dynamite being quietly stacked beneath us.